So, the decision, do you launch something that everybody's excited about, but is not ready? Or do you hold the line and potentially risk disappointment, put your job on the line, even though it's the right thing to do?
If you build software or lead people who do, then you're in the right place. This is Hard Calls. Real decisions, real leaders, real outcomes.
Hi, everyone. I am Trisha Price, and welcome back to the Hard Calls podcast. On today's show, we have Peter Bailey, Executive Director at JP Morgan Payments, where he leads product teams responsible for developer experience, developer portal, and API platforms. In other words, anytime you're moving money electronically, there's a good chance their systems are helping make it happen. Peter and I know each other well because we go way back. We both found our passion for cutting edge technology and product early in our careers in the fintech industry, working together at Primatics Financial. During our time together, we reminisced on the values and mentality at Primatics Financial and how it impacted our career journeys in product. We discussed how to navigate AI and technology disruption and product innovation in a highly regulated industry like banking. We talked about the surprising role customers play, and then Peter flipped our roles and asked me some hard questions. Hi, Peter. I'm so excited to welcome you to Hard Calls.
Very excited to be here, Trisha. Thank you for having me. Honored to be a guest and looking forward to talking with you in this format.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Peter, as you know, this is the Hard Calls podcast. So I like to start every single episode with a hard call that you've had to make. So looking back over your career, recent or further back, tell us about a hard call you've had to make. What made it really challenging and what'd you learn from it?
There's always one that really jumps out to me. It was shortly after I joined JP Morgan. I was hired to be the global head of product for our wholesale credit risk group. And shortly before I joined, we had received some constructive, if not critical, feedback from the Federal Reserve about our CCAR submissions. And CCAR is the process that large banks go through to submit their stress tests and demonstrate capital adequacy and our ability to pay dividends and kind of execute our plan. And we had received feedback specific to the way that we were providing information in our reporting, and were at risk of not being able to execute our plan. And so when I was hired, this was the problem I was given, and to go and fix that. And what we realized almost immediately was that a lot of the information that we were providing to the Fed had to do with our customers' financial data. It was the vast majority of the information that we were providing, and we had a pretty broken way of collecting it and reporting it across all of our different lines of business, across our investment bank, commercial bank, private bank, business bank. All of these different teams were doing it differently, and ultimately, by the time it got to the Fed, we were not showing up well, and the Fed knew that, and it was raising concerns on our ability to manage risk and the information we were reporting. And one of the things we quickly realized was that we have a lot of public clients, publicly traded entities, and a lot of this financial data is publicly available. So let's bring it into a new platform, and we can structure it and ensure that we're delivering this information consistently. And while this was not the end solution, it definitely was a huge step forward, and it was going to be able to demonstrate significant progress that we were improving our reporting, and ultimately was going to be foundational to a lot of the risk transformation that we wanted to have at the bank, and ultimately that I was responsible for delivering. So fast forward, we within a quarter, we have a platform that we're ready to launch, and everyone's really excited about the capabilities, but ultimately like improving the data and the submission and CCAR. And we've made commitments to our senior management chain, to our regulators. And as we were approaching that launch, one of the things that really started to become apparent to me and was just not sitting well is that the vendor we had chosen to provide the data really just was not the right fit. And no matter how hard we tried, it was becoming more and more apparent that we had made the wrong decision in terms of how we were bringing this data into our ecosystem. And so we had a decision to make of, do we launch and meet this target. And I think we still would have been able to show significant strides from where we were. Or do we look at it and say this is not the right time, this is not the right product, and we need to take a little bit more time and go back to the drawing board. So, the decision: do you launch something that everybody's excited about, but is not ready, or do you hold the line and potentially risk disappointment, put your job on the line, even though it's the right thing to do?
I think much pressure, much pressure to make that call.
And as product managers, we have these decisions, and you get to make these decisions, and that's the exciting part. In my case, I was very new to JP Morgan, and I was in that point where you're trying to prove yourself. And ultimately, I held the line. And this was the big decision that I got to make, or had to make, early in my career at JP Morgan. And I think that decision and reflection, it may have almost got me fired, but in the same vein, it accelerated my career and it helped build my career. And I think it's because it helped me establish trust that I was willing to make the hard call and not necessarily the popular call.
I love that you shared that example because, you made the hard decision, the hard call, maybe not the popular one. And especially in a company like JP Morgan, in something as visible as a risk process with the Fed, that's immense pressure. And it's such a great learning moment for all of our listeners to really understand when you make the right calls, that in your gut is the right decision for the company and not the right decision just for yourself in the moment to feel good. It usually pays back in terms of career.
Yeah. In the moment, it's hard to know, right? What I've learned and taken from it is really to trust your gut and to be as transparent as you can.
Yeah.
You're not having to make the decision. It's not just you, right? Yeah. You are collaborating with as many people around, sharing the information you have, sharing the perspectives, doing the pro-con analysis. And ultimately, if it gets down to one person making the decision, you've taken all of those perspectives into account, and it doesn't. It feels more like a group decision, and obviously you're working very hard to build consensus. And I think that moment, was interesting in that it happened so quickly in my career at JP Morgan. But it's one that I've certainly learned a lot from, taken a lot from. And I know when you asked me to think about a hard call, I immediately went to this one decision. I still think to this day, it's probably the hardest call I've had to make as a product manager because of the circumstance I was in.
Yeah, I love it, and so relatable for everybody. Peter, I want to take a couple steps backwards in our career down memory lane for folks. And like I said in the intro, early in our careers, you and I worked together at Primatics. And Primatics was such an interesting place to work for you and I because it started out as a services company. We started to build a product, but we sort of had some outsourcing and services around that product. And so the company really went through a transformation, as I think we did too, in terms of learning what product was and learning how to be a product company. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about what you learned during that time and how the experience shaped you, and how you ended up, continuing down the path of product and where you are today.
Yeah, so much. And I've got a good question for you as part of this as well. Yeah, I think the first thing is, I never left fintech after Primatics. And the interesting thing is I didn't know at the time that it was getting into fintech. My story and journey to Primatics is I was, had been working in the investment industry. I had been in New York at a hedge fund. And when I moved back to Northern Virginia and was being recruited to Primatics, I was anchoring around, and what I was being sold is we were an M&A company. We were helping banks go through mergers and acquisitions. And so, first couple of weeks on the job, and I'm learning a lot about technology and learning how we were going to be solving these problems was unique. It was not what I expected. but I certainly I loved it, and that really has kind of set forth my career. So as I was I always think about this term that has now become ubiquitous in fintech, and I wanted to ask you if at the time, like, was Primatics a fintech? Did we even know that we were working for a fintech at that time?
I don't think we used that term. Do you? I don't remember using that term. I don't know that I thought about it in that context. I think, I came from a different background, like almost the opposite of you coming in, right? I came from a technology background. I had actually been an engineer and had spent most of my time either working for product tech companies. I had that stint at Fannie Mae as well, but had always been in technology. And so for me coming in, I came into the company thinking I was coming to work for a product company that was in the early stages that just happened to use some consulting revenue to bootstrap creating the product. So it's really funny because I feel like you and I came into the company like from exact opposite angles.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I would have said it was a fintech company either, but I would have said I was joining a technology company, building a product, and just using the services revenue to help fund it.
I think we can both imagine which founder recruited us based on those stories.
I can't wait for them to both listen to this, Peter.
Yeah. Well, I was reflecting. So, kind of the learning perspective, I think first and foremost, like meeting you, having this opportunity, meeting Mike, like many of my best friends, my mentors came from that experience. And like I said, I never really left the industry. While I now work in a much larger company, almost everything that I'm doing, I feel like grew out of, or I learned at Primatics and working together. I think that maybe the two biggest takeaways back to kind of your point of services into product. One, just the customer empathy that, again, not in the moment was that something that I was consciously thinking about, which I now all the time think about and everything that we're doing in product. But there's certain moments that I reflect on frequently at Primatics where in my early days of kind of like starting to adopt product, we were very focused on like, hey, customer, do this yourself. Right? We built an interface. You can do this. It's self-service. And I distinctly remember many conversations where our clients they weren't interested in doing it themselves. Like that's not what they wanted. I don't want your product or your software. I want it to achieve the outcome. Like I want to actually acquire the next bank, or I want to complete this integration so we can move forward. And that was really interesting. And I think something to always think about of like, what is your customer trying to achieve and what is the outcome that they're looking for?
I love that. And you just made me think about like today's environment, how we would have solved that versus then. Like, I think in today's environment, we would have immediately jumped to like, what kind of agentic interface could we create so they could just ask questions and we would produce results. But this was not that time, right? This was a lot longer ago. And at that time, you're right. The answer to have customer empathy and solve their problem was let's create an outsourcing team that does it for them. And it really doesn't matter what the solution is, right? Solutions change based on technology and what's available to us. But what mattered is that we solved the customer problem in a way that worked for our customer base, which was great.
Yeah, and I think that approach is kind of the second learning that I've spent a lot of time thinking about in my career, which is just the value of building really good product and where you need to invest in technology and product experiences versus services. The Primatics experience was one where, yes, we had started with services. We had very talented consultants. We had very smart people. And my opinion is that it's easier to solve things with services. It's easier to solve a problem.
Yeah.
You can put smart people on it. And what I think we started to learn, and if you reflect back, is it's very hard to scale that model. And it's much harder to build a product that can be dynamic enough to solve all of your customers' different problems and make it flexible enough or configurable enough. And so as I've grown in my career, I spent a lot of my time thinking about the first principles and is this a problem that can be solved at scale within a product, within technology, and really think very critically before signing up for a launch or a strategy that would require people or would be signing our operational teams up to have a lot of manual intervention. And not to say you should never do that. I think there's an age and a stage of a company and a product that you're launching where you may need or want to surround it with people to ensure its success. But I think that's definitely something I'm much more conscious of now based on the experiences that we had at Primatics.
I mean, it's fascinating when you talk about it because you're talking about some of the problems we had that limited scale at a fairly small company, startup basically to mid-size. And now here you are at one of the largest financial institutions in the world, building, an experience that's complicated and absolutely has to scale, right? And so how did you make a transition like that? I mean, it's literally as opposite. I mean, you can't surround what you're building, a developer experience for payments with lots of services and almost band-aids, as I would say. So how'd you make that transition?
Yeah. I think that challenge that you're laying out is probably what really brought me to JP Morgan initially. It wasn't as if it was a complete 180 and that we had been trying to sell our software into the largest banks. We had been trying to sell to JP Morgan, and we were almost just too early, right? The big banks hadn't learned how to adopt the cloud and data privacy and sharing confidential information, which led to kind of us spinning up almost a bootstrapped advisory practice. And so I had the opportunity to lead that and work with some of these larger banks and see firsthand some of the challenges that they were experiencing. And so I think that the challenge to really come in and say, hey, am I at the point in my career where I can solve these problems, where I can deliver this at scale, is what to me was really exciting. And ultimately why I said yes to come into JP Morgan. And so I think some of the principles that we learned earlier in our career at Primatics and just at smaller companies in general, I tried to bring with me. And speed is certainly one, right? I think our biggest differentiator at Primatics was around being able to, one, being first to market with a relatively niche offering, and being able to continue to launch and ship quickly. And there's many times we talked about like, why aren't the incumbents catching up? And it's because we continue to bring just ship fast and kind of stay ahead of the curve. And I think that's certainly a principle that I still try and instill in myself and in our teams. At JP Morgan, it's a little bit bigger. You constantly have to be thinking very big, thinking at scale, but delivering small, right? I think you have the risk of like becoming paralyzed by trying to boil the ocean if you're trying to solve the biggest problem that is going to work for every JP Morgan customer and work in every region and at every customer size. And so, I still try and encapsulate those concepts of speed for sure into my day to day. I think the other and maybe the biggest one was just when you work at a small company, and you and I used to talk about this, is just the ownership thinking. Like you have to think like an owner. And I don't know, I was conscious of that, but it's kind of like you're just going to do what it takes to be successful, which means some days you're selling, some days you're solutioning, some days you're a product manager, some days you're on the floor with a technologist. Like you have to do all of those jobs to build a great product. And I think that was one of the things I just loved about working at a small company. And you have to be conscious of bringing that mentality to a larger company. because we have functions that are at scale for all of those things. We have a design practice and project managers and sales and business development, product managers and engineers and QA. And those are functions that exist. But if you rely on just, I'm going to stay in my lane, you're likely not going to be successful at having the impact that you want to have. And so applying that ownership thinking, which doesn't mean you're necessarily doing all of the jobs, but you are consciously connecting the people and the functions, and collaborating and building that camaraderie, and just thinking like an owner, is something that I brought from JP Morgan from Primatics to JP Morgan.
I love that ownership thinking. And it is so critical as we move up in our careers and become leaders, that regardless which function we're in, we can take that ownership mentality. And I think you and I did do pretty much every role that was possible when we were at Primatics. And so kind of being able to have empathy for all the roles around us and then use that in the ownership thinking. I love that as a big piece of how you've been successful as you've transitioned into the banking industry. And, the banking industry is incredibly highly regulated, and you work for one of the largest, most complex ones in the world, yet you are innovating and you are doing new things, and there are disruptors popping up all over the place, and you have new technologies, AI, blockchain, crypto. How do you approach innovating in the space of payments with all of the new tech coming up, yet still balancing the importance of this regulated large institution?
Great question. I think the fact that there is so much innovation in particularly the payment space is actually what brought me to the job that I'm in now. We started the conversation. I joined JP Morgan to lead our risk practice and really enjoyed it, and had a great, had kind of a great role, great team, and that brought us into COVID. And during COVID, it's like the height of when risk platforms are, are these companies going to go under? Is the airline industry going to fail? Is the hospitality industry going to fail? Like, you talk about stress testing. This was a everyday exercise for us, and it was really gratifying and satisfying to see a lot of the hard work I had done, get really put and stress tested in its own way. But at about the same time, looking at what was happening in the industry of just the amount of apps that you're downloading on your phone to send money, Venmo, PayPal, Square, Cash App, Stripe, like just on and on. And with blockchain and some of these new, technologies and crypto starting to become a bit more ubiquitous, is what brought me into the payment space. And I think that really is kind of my own ethos. So I'm going to answer this question like twofold. I think me personally, it's learn. Like, I spend probably 10 to 15 hours a week listening to podcasts, reading, taking online classes through Udemy, and just training myself on these technologies that are going to have a big impact. I think it's fair to say they will have an impact. Now, how big, we can talk about that. But being able to be conversive and understand how I might be able to take advantage of them has been something that's I've really enjoyed just growing personally. On the professional front, and I think as a product manager, we should all, maybe the number one trait we need to have is be curious.
Yeah.
Right. Think about, how could you use blockchain in your platform or in your product? Mm-hmm. How could you use AI in your product? Is there a role for these innovative technologies? And if you're not thinking that, I think the disruption part of it feels threatening. But if you are, it feels really exciting.
Yeah.
I think the second piece, certainly for me in my role that I have now, is being really intentional. Because it's not easy, right, to incorporate these new ideas and new technologies, some of which can be a little bit scary, or in our case, we have not yet fully positioned around how we want to use AI or blockchain or crypto. And so you have to be very intentional about how do you go and explore the art of the possible. And I think the third is going with that of collaborating with the experts. So there's not going to be a defined path that says, hey, here's exactly how you should incorporate an AI agent into your website yet. That we'll get there. But if you wait, you have the risk of really falling behind and being disruptive. And one of the things that's always kept me at JP Morgan, I'm now going on my 8th year here, is how innovative an organization we are. And that starts at the top, but all of our leaders are constantly talking about innovation and investing heavily in new technologies. And so, I think that trickles down, and I've really tried to embrace that and build a lot of kind of my own career and that curiosity and exploring the art of the possible to go and build a great product and to go build great experiences for our clients.
I often talk about innovation with the industry conferences and customers. And I talk about it just like you did, Peter. I talk about the fact that innovation requires inside out thinking and outside in thinking. And inside out thinking meaning you got to learn. You've got to go play with these technologies. You've got to take classes. You got to get your hands on, all the different models, all the different AI tools that are out there and figure out which ones work. And it's not just like which ones work in which situations. But then you have to combine that with, okay, like it's great that new technology is coming out. But what's the customer problem you're trying to solve? And so I call that outside in thinking. And it's like, you really can't innovate until you can find sort of that perfect intersection between the inside out thinking and the outside in thinking. And, that's what you were just articulating. And it's so great to hear that that's encouraged at a company like JP Morgan and not just at, startups and tech companies, because I think that's important to serve our customers and to do our jobs well as product leaders. And, for you in particular, you are trying to innovate, you are innovating, you're shipping product, and you're doing that to attract new customers. And also you have existing customers. And a lot of times when it comes to different banking products, well, any product really, customers can be resistant to change. So how do you handle that trade-off of, taking advantage of innovation and some of this inside out thinking that you're doing and investing in yourself, yet making sure that you are putting customers first and thinking through their experience?
In my experience, it's always easier to build something new, right? Greenfield, brand new idea. Let's go and attract new customer segment. It's a lot of fun doing that, and it probably is. It's quite a bit easier than building for your existing customer base and taking the complexity into consideration. One of the things that I think I've gotten better at in my career, and I've learned so much at JP Morgan, is I think the earlier that you can start talking to your customers about your ideas, the better. Yeah. So if you're building something new, there's no harm in going and talking to your customer and say, we have an idea. We want to be great in this space. So we want to have the best developer experience. We want to make all of our APIs publicly accessible. We want to deliver self-service, digitally native capabilities to you. But we're not there yet. But we would really love for you to collaborate with us and bring you along for that ride. And if you're open to it, like maybe even try it out or join an advisory panel or participate in a beta. And there's a lot of different softer ways to bring your existing customer a lot closer to the innovation. You're not breaking anything that they're doing. You're not forcing them to migrate. And I think that approach builds a lot of trust. It builds a lot of very strong relationships. And you're getting really great feedback and kind of pressure testing your ideas and what you're building. But if you do it right, like there's an opportunity to create this shared accountability and kind of almost like a pride where your clients are participating in that journey and eventually are, hey, I want the new thing. How quickly can I get there? And can then be an advocate for the next wave of customers who maybe didn't go on that journey with you, but can be advocates for the products that you're building. So that's certainly one approach that I've really tried to employ and really encourage my teams and the people I work with to spend as much time as possible sharing the vision and sharing the intent and sharing the strategy, not just sharing the product.
I love that. I love your concept of one, building trust to bring them on the journey, but equally important to building trust is getting their feedback, getting their buy-in, getting them excited about it. So they're obviously sharing their feedback. They're helping you build a great product. You have more confidence in your product because customers are giving you that clear feedback and helping you design what works for them. But then they're excited, and they can, be your biggest cheerleader and advocate with other customers and talk about why it works for them. And I think that's such a great approach for sure.
I think that there's also a huge piece of just by sharing the vision and the art of the possible, you are in a very collaborative posture early on. Yeah, oftentimes I think like a lot of the strategy in launching a new product is like, let's launch an MVP, truly a minimum viable product, and you're bringing that to a customer. And all you're going to hear is all the new things. What are the next set of features? Where's this? Where's that? I need this. I want that. And you're in a bit of a defensive posture, and you're playing catch up from the beginning. Versus, this is where I'd like to go. How does that sound? Do you want to go on that journey with us? Is that the right journey to go on? Do we have the right roadmap to get there? You're also indirectly saying, I don't have all of that right now. And I think it's been really successful to helping us with adoption. So when our customers are adopting our newer products, there is a understanding of this broader roadmap and commitment to continue to be great. And I think that's where a brand like JP Morgan and the investments that we've made over years into our different platforms really helps, because there's a higher level of trust that, hey, what I'm getting today is going to get better tomorrow and the next day, and by a year from now should be really great, and my voice is going to be heard and will be incorporated into the experiences that I'm adopting.
I love that. And, it's clear in your prior roles and then in your current one as well, you've been really successful at this balance of innovating, investing in yourself, investing in your team, and learning new technology, whether it's AI or blockchain or crypto and all the things that relate to payments and beyond, right? And that's not easy to do when you're balancing what you just talked about, which is building customer trust and bringing customers along for the journey. There are lots of listeners out there today who haven't been able to balance those two things, who are struggling at their institutions, especially ones that are highly regulated or moving slower than others, to do what you've done. What advice do you have for product leaders who are struggling to sort of get over this hump and transform and take advantage of some of the newer technologies and concepts?
Yeah, I think it's invest in yourself. There's learning in this environment because of all these new technologies is not an expensive proposition, right? It's a priority conversation that you need to have with yourself around, am I going to carve out time to go and learn about these new ideas? And everybody learns differently, but because of all of the different formats, whether it's watching YouTube, listening to a podcast while you're working out, doing some hands-on experimenting with, an Udemy type platform, there's a lot of different ways to go and educate yourself. But I think it's, putting down, just letting yourself be okay with not being the expert. I certainly I had the moment of feeling pretty threatened not too long ago, where you're like, man, like I don't have a background in computer science or artificial, or data science, and everything's AI and LLM, and everything you read is that working in technology, there's going to be efficiencies. And so I really just took it as, I think, an opportunity. I said, hey, like, I'd love to just go and learn more and understand how this works and understand how it could be applied. And particularly with, my case, and I think we should all be thinking about this, is as product managers, I think we have different strengths ranging from, creativity, strategy, down to actually execution and, hardcore delivery. How do you take these technologies and apply them to your strengths?
Yeah. And I think no matter which of those strengths you are and how technical you are, there's an opportunity to do exactly what you just said.
Yeah, I had a question for you because I thought you were going to go in a slightly different direction, which is, as a product manager, this differentiating between being a subject matter expert in the domain that you're working in versus being a expert product manager. Yeah. And your career of working at Fannie Mae, the largest loan institution in the world, to come into Primatics, we were working at the intersection of risk and finance, but ultimately building awesome loan accounting engine and then reserving, taking that expertise to Encino, where you continue to kind of build upon a similar set of expertise, and then go into Pendo, where the domain is not important based on my understanding, and more the experience that the consumer or the business is having. I'd love to hear your thoughts around like that intersection of what makes the great product manager and how much of it is truly the domain versus the function and some of the things we're talking about here.
I love that question, Peter. For me, I felt there's obviously certain pieces to all of our success that are sort of our attitude and our aptitude, our willingness to learn, the questions, our engine, our drive. And I think a lot of what made me successful was that, right? I'd always be the one who was willing to outwork everybody and ask a lot of questions and learn. I did become an expert in a lot of, I'll just call it the loan domain, lending, credit risk, lending, loan accounting, through those experiences. And I certainly think that was a really important part of my success at Encino in terms of getting customers to trust me, to your earlier conversations about getting customer trust. And I think that expertise in something is important when you're building and selling a commercial loan origination system to some of the largest banks in the world. They want to know that the person in charge of product understands what the heck they're talking about. And I think that expertise and that knowledge earned me the right for customers to trust me and earned me the opportunity for the role. But I think what ended up separating our product at Encino from the others, and why we got the Black Turtleneck Award for innovation and best product, and why we snuck up on our competitors and outperformed them and out executed it and won that market, I think was because of my product craft. And I think that, when we did things like auto spreading, which is, for people who don't care about banking, basically taking a financial statement of a company and extracting, using AI, all the information out of it and categorizing it. No one else was doing those things, right? This is well before the LLMs. And I think that was the innovative mindset, and that was my product mindset that helped me execute and win. And so when I decided it was time to do something different, I decided that honing that craft was what was critically important for this next piece of my career. And I knew there'd be no better place to do it than coming to Pendo, where I'm surrounded by the best product managers. I get to spend time with the best product leaders all over and really understand what tools they're missing, what problems they're trying to solve. And so just like you talked about the ways that you're investing in yourself by listening to podcasts and listening and learning, that is truly why when I was leaving Encino and figuring out my next opportunity, I wanted to come to Pendo, was to really learn and hone that craft. And then I know I can apply it to anything. And so I think that the craft of product is the only way and the most important way to win if you're building great product and execute. But I think when you're working in a highly regulated industry like I was at Encino and you are at JP Morgan, you can't earn people's trust if you don't know what you're talking about.
Great answer. I've always wanted to know that. So
That's
I
funny
think kind
because
of,
you and I have known each other for so long, and I don't think we've ever really had this conversation.
yeah, I mean, going back to, what you were asking me, and as product managers, like that's an area of investment, right? And it's an area in building your own confidence and knowing that the things that you've learned in one area can be applied to another area.
Wow. Great advice for all of our listeners today, too, right? You don't have to feel pigeonholed or trapped. If you've always worked on, a horizontal platform like Pendo, like anything, of that nature, that doesn't mean you can't go work in a highly specialized industry and take what you've learned. It just means you're going to need to invest to learn that. And if you have been in a highly regulated or specialized vertical and you want to apply that, you have those product management skills, be confident in them, but be willing to invest in them as you try something new. So I really like that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Peter, I thank you so much for being on Hard Calls today. Thank you for taking me down a little bit of memory lane and sharing a lot of your experience and expertise with our listeners. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been an honor. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. Wish this podcast the best of success in the future, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Peter.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Hard Calls, the product podcast where we share best practices and all the things you need to succeed. If you enjoyed the show today, share it with your friends and come back for more.